We are studying the lesson Self is God. We saw the Upanishadic thing of definition or what is God. We saw that. Ken Upanishad. Till now what we have covered. Self is God. Meaning what layperson calls as God, Vedanta calls as self. And that self is you. So the word God gives an indicator that it is separate from you. The word self gives an indicator that it is you. So, two things. One is there is the word God that we are familiar with, and then there is something else that we are familiar with. That is the self. So the self is understood as oneself. God is understood as something distinct and different. Vedanta comes and says, what you understand as self is what God is, or what you understand as God is what the self is. Then the problem is, wherever we talk about the self, whenever you use the word self is used in the sense of the limited individual. The word self is used in the sense of limited individual. Limited individual means the name, the form, whatever it is. So that limited individual is not told as God. Because how can the limited individual be? Even though we like to be like that. Even though we would want the individuality to be like God. So what is the individuality? The individuality is the combination of matter and spirit. So the matter component is not God. The self component is God. So the individual, you have two things, spirit and matter. You have a choice what you want to assert. You have a choice what you want to associate with. You can associate with the matter and you can call as self. You can associate with the spirit and you can call as the self. So when you associate with the self, it is called Brahman, God. Therefore, the I, the limited individual is not God. When it is said, you are God, if I ask, who are you? You will say, I am Venkatachalam. Therefore, you can't substitute. Venkatachalam equals God. You cannot substitute like that. Who are you? You will say, I am Ganesh. Then you cannot substitute. Ganesh equals God. Therefore, there is that combination. What is the combination? The matter and the spirit. The matter is not God. The spirit is God. That is where we saw the topic ego and I. We have covered all that. The ego and I. And that I is the reality. I am that I am. And that I is the reality. And that I is the I that is real is pronounced very clearly in the Kena Upanishad. What did Kena Upanishad say? Capital E, small e. If you want to remember Kena Upanishad, what you should remember? Capital E and small e. Year of the year. Viditam, aviditam. With that we stopped. Viditam, aviditam. Viditam is the known, aviditam unknown, and it is beyond the known and the unknown. If it is beyond the known and the, if it is beyond the known and the unknown, how will I know it? How can one know it? The fact that you are asking, how can I know it, itself is an indication that you have not understood these two words, viditam, aviditam. Because when you say, how do I know it? All knowing happens through experience. When you say, how will I know it? You are asking about how will I experience it. If you say this is how you can experience it, then you will ask for conducive environment for experience. What is the preparation? What is a conducive environment for experience? One person will come and say, sit with your eyes closed and chant the mantra. That is a conducive environment in which you will experience. Another person will say, go to the temple and see the deity there. That is a conducive, so you will, that's a conducive environment for experience. So what you will do, you will start creating environments to experience. Ken Upanishad says, all this you are trying because you have not understood viditam, aviditam. If you understand this viditam, aviditam, and beyond that, you will stop making this attempt. And with this background, if you look at religions, all religions, including most here, are always trying to make an, create an environment to, you create an environment for what? To experience. What are the conducive environment? Meditation is one conducive environment. Pranayama is another environment. Or it can be a combination of, in the name of holistic environment, put a little bit of everything. Upanishad comes and says, any attempt that you make to create an experience and what you learn out of it is not real. You can create an environment, you can end up experiencing something, and whatever you experience is not self. Viditam, aviditam. All up to this we have studied. Therefore, what you should not do in the name of religion, what you should not do, don't make an attempt to create an environment to experience. Classla, you take us to a height, sir. And after the class, if only we sing bhajans for 10 minutes, that will take us to another height. After the class, after the bhajans, and then meditation, sir. You say, wow, we are creating, we don't create environments to experience. Are you able to follow? As it is, human beings are so deluded doing that. And we also don't want to join the deluded group. Though people may not appreciate, though people may not understand, though people may not accept, the truth has to be told uncompromisingly. That is Upanishad. You don't compromise the truth to satisfy people. The truth has to be told, and humanity has to adjust to the truth. You don't compromise the truth. But sir, if you talk like this, nobody will understand. It's okay. If nobody understands, for whose is the loss? For whose is the loss? Nobody understands Vedanta, sir. For whose is the loss? It's not the loss of Vedanta, it is the loss of the people. Why? The truth is this. What is the truth? You cannot create an environment, and in that environment experience something, and that experience you cannot call it as what? You should not call that experience as God. Why? Because as soon as the environment changes, what will happen? Your experience of God also will change. It means what? God will come and go, isn't it? Second, every time you want to experience God, you have to keep creating that. Every time you want to experience God, you have to keep creating that environment. New Year's Day, some positive message has to be given, isn't it? Supposed to be a New Year's Day. New Year, old year, and all, there's no. Somebody puts a calendar and everybody is celebrating. Every time, the moment you depend on an environment to experience, what happens? The environment can never be the same. Therefore, your experience can never be the same. And if the environment changes, your experience also will change. And thereafter, what will you do? You will desperately try to recreate the environment. You will desperately try to recreate the same environment again and again and again so that you can experience. Invariably, what happens? You don't experience. Invariably, you don't experience. Why? Because it is not a subject matter of, it's not a subject matter of an experience. Then what it is? Then what it is? You don't have to struggle to name it. Just leave it like that. That's where Upanishad says. Then how would you? Then what it is? You don't have to struggle and create a word for it. You can just leave it like that. Up to this we saw Viditam, Aviditam. Then the last topic is beyond the opposites. Any environment, all environment happens in the medium of opposites. Again, I repeat. Any environment that's how I'm connecting it. I'm going to prepare பண்ணினு I also prepared well, and it started burning. I thought I'm going to get burnt. Which I said, okay, I don't want to get burnt, and I'll stop the class, doesn't matter. I don't want to get burnt. Conducive, all environments happens in the medium of opposites. Environment means the world is the environment. World is the environment, and that world is of opposites. On observation, you don't find one pair of opposites. On observation, you find pairs. Pairs means you can't determine and say million pairs. You can't determine and say billion pairs. World is the pairs of opposites, and world and Brahman is beyond the opposites. If Brahman is beyond opposites, it's beyond the world. It's beyond the world means you cannot create a conducive environment in the world to experience Brahman. But you can say, who told you we are interested in Brahman, sir? Who told you that we are interested in experiencing Brahman? We are not interested in experiencing Brahman at all. We are more interested in sorting out. Correct. Aparna, correct. We are more interested in sorting out our problems first. Then we will come to Brahman. The nature of solving the problem is it will recreate another. You can never solve a problem without creating another. You agree, you disagree, you accept, you don't accept, it doesn't change. You cannot solve anything without creating another. It means what? Continuously you will be creating problem. Correct. Continuously you will be creating problems, one after the other. Then what are we trying to solve? We really don't know what we are trying to solve. Then what are we trying to solve? We really don't know what we are trying to solve if some solution is sought in the world. Why? Because it is called environment is made up of pairs of opposites. On what basis we call it as pairs of opposites? Environment means something unique is here which is not outside of it. That's what is called an environment. Correct? Environment means something is here which is not outside. So if we say the class is an environment, something is here which is not outside. So something is here, something is not here. This is called opposite. And the world is made up of innumerable number of opposites. This innumerable number of opposites is what is called plurality. The combination of the innumerable number of opposites all put together in one word is called plurality. And the world is known as the pluralistic phenomena. It is a pluralistic phenomena made up of innumerable number of pairs of opposites. Why do we say innumerable? Is because if we say the world is made up of opposites, then the natural question is you have to transcend opposites. Then the natural question is how many pairs of opposites that I have to transcend? Innumerable pair. Oh my God. Innumerable pair. How can you travel? How can you transcend? How can you transcend innumerable pairs? Therefore, the message beyond the opposites. Beyond the opposites is an indication that never try to create an environment to experience. In the initial stages, we all are in need of environments, conducive environments in the initial stages. Remember that. But here we are discussing at the Upanishadic level. We are all supposed to be Upanishadic students now, at least temporarily. Yeah. So at that level, we are not really dependent on environments. We are not really dependent on environment. Or we have done all this in the past, having understood that nothing has been experienced. Therefore, we are not doing it anymore. We have tried all that in the past. Assumption. On a practical plane, at our current level, we start with Sasangatve Nisangatvam, Nisangatve Nirmohatvam, Nirmohatve Nischalatatvam, Nischalatatve Jivan Muktihi. Bhajagovinda. Sasangatve Nisangatvam, Nisangatve Nirmohatvam, Nirmohatve Nischalatatvam, Nischalatatve Jivan Muktihi. In this gradation, here we are talking about the Nischalatatvam state. It means he has covered all the ground. It means he has covered all the ground. Are you able to follow? We start with satsang, which is a conducive environment. We all have to start with it. Though it is possible that you can study anywhere and everywhere, you create a conducive environment of a classroom first, isn't it? Though it is possible that you can study anywhere and everywhere, but to start, where do we start? A conducive environment. Conducive environment you start with to understand what? To understand the knowledge, not to experience God. In Vedanta, we understand, we create satsang, we are very much valuing the satsang. Why? Not because it is going to help you experience God. It is going to create an experience for you to gain the knowledge, and the knowledge is the recognition. Therefore, anything that is part of the opposite will not help you to experience Brahman. Therefore, the self, the I, the capital E is beyond the opposites. This is the connection. This is the connection in the of this the flow in the entire lesson. Viditam, aviditam, and all that. Anything you discuss, anything you understand, happens in the medium of the world. Since it is happening in the medium of the world, experience of God also cannot happen in the world. Therefore, it is beyond the opposites. Because of the limitation of language, we are using the word experience. Actually, it is not. Actually, it is not experience. It is only recognition. Just knowing. It's another word. Again, it is another word. Again, it is another word. Therefore, when the Sanat Kumaras went and asked Dakshinamurti, what is Brahman? He just stayed. He didn't utter a word. He just stayed. He stayed quiet. One. And he wasn't even looking at the four. He was looking elsewhere. Maybe camera anga vechirundanga pola irukku avarku. So he was not looking at the four, he was looking somewhere. Maybe zoom camera anga vechitanga avarku. So he was looking at the camera maybe. Because any word creates invariably an opposite. Any word that you utter, any word that you use, invariably it will create an opposite. And the self, the I, the Brahman is beyond the opposites. This is the topic that we are going to study today. Beyond the opposites. We will read the text and then we will study it. Beyond the opposites.
Beyond the opposites. In another attempt to capture the Supreme God, the scripture uses the language of contradiction to explain the inexplicable. Brahman, God, is described as that which moves, that moves not. That is afar, that is near. That is inside, that is outside. The list of opposites is endless. Describing thus, the scripture establishes that Brahman is neither of the opposites, above the opposites, while the world is an expression of unending pairs of opposites known in Sanskrit as dvandvas. The language of contradiction is therefore deployed to help a seeker stretch his intellect beyond the world to accommodate the magnitude of Brahman. That Brahman is beyond the dvandvas, beyond the opposites, beyond the world. It affords a practical exercise to free oneself, detach from one's involvement and attachment to the world at large. to negate the world. What remains is the supreme reality, Brahman, God. God is your supreme self, your original nature, just as health is your original nature. The best of doctors cannot provide you with health. They can only remove disease from your body. What remains is your health. So too, the self is your original being. Your ignorance has shrouded the self. The Vedantic knowledge merely removes the shroud of ignorance. The self reveals itself. You regain your original divinity, attain spiritual enlightenment.
The difficulty here is how to communicate that which cannot be communicated. How to describe that which cannot be described. Oh, that which cannot be described doesn't become the description. Intellect understands it like that. Therefore, language, they use is a unique style. They use a very unique style. The Shastras uses the unique style. The unique style is the language of contradiction. It's not that they are contradicting. You can understand all your thinking has a problem. In order to resolve that, they use the language of contradiction. Tad dhure, tat antike. Dhura means far. Antike, near. It's very far, it's very near. It is grosser than the grossest, subtler than the subtlest. How can a single entity have both the properties? That is the problem. You will follow? How can a single entity can have extremes like this? Vedanta comes and says, it is not that we are creating it, that's how it is. It is not that it is not that we are sitting and creating it. This is how it is. That's where we say Vedanta reveals it as it is. And if the human intellect is not able to comprehend it, it is the limitation of the human intellect, and you got to stretch it. And in order to help us to stretch, the language of contradiction is used. First thing, we'll go from a totally different angle. In life, we all seek clarity. Chariya, are you okay with this? Huh? Palatur. We all seek class. And why do we come for this class? At least here we'll get some clarity. So the question is, we all seek knowledge. We all seek knowledge. We all seek something because we want clarity. Clarity means that which can be precise and it doesn't have opposite. Clarity means that which is precise and it cannot have the opposite. Then only you can call it, then only it is clarity. Is he a good person or bad person? Clarity. Good person, very clear. Bad person, Again, very clear. Clarity. There is a clarity. Good person, clarity. Bad person, clarity. Do you love me or not? Clarity. Isn't it? Do you love me or not? Clarity. Yes, I love you. There is clarity. No, I don't love you. Clarity. That's why all thinking becomes clear if we answer yes or no. So human beings get a clarity only when it is answered as yes or no. Ram Subramanian, are you okay till now? Yes or no. The reality of life comes and says it is yes and no. Do you love me or not? Yes and no. You are a good person or not? Yes and no. Summer or winter? Yes and no. This yes and no intellect cannot comprehend. For it has to be in a box. Yes is a box, no is a box. And as long as it is in a box, we are very comfortable. Clear? Now they say get out of the box. In a box, where is that box that you should get out of? The intellectual box. What is the intellectual box? Box then? Box. Yes or no? Because with yes or no, reconciliation happens very fast. Reconciliation happens very fast with yes or no. Life doesn't give you that luxury. Life doesn't give you the luxury of getting into this clarity of yes or no. Reality doesn't work like that. Carefully follow. For the transactional level of living life, we are talking about life in Vedanta. We talk about life in two levels. One is the transactional level, another is the order of another is the reality. It's called Vyavaharika and Paramarthika. Vyavaharika is what we call as practical life. Paramarthika is what we call as the reality. So whenever we talk about Vedanta, we always bring in and say, sir, but practically, what does practically means? On a transactional level. At a transactional level, we assume certain things. At a transactional level, we assume certain things. What is it that we assume at the transactional level? Even though the new year happens over different periods of time in different parts of the world, isn't it? New year doesn't happen at the same time all over the world, correct? By the time we say New Year, Happy New Year, other part of the world would have fallen off to sleep celebrating the New Year. Correct? But then for transactional purposes, we take whatever time zone you are in, you understand that is transaction. That is common sense. Are you able to follow? So what we call as transactional level is common sense. And elsewhere he said common sense is the most difficult commodity to find, because it's not, even though we call it as common sense, it is not that common. Why? That common sense must be backed by the Paramarthika Tattva. The common sense is not backed by the truths of life. The common sense will not be common sense. Are you able to understand the connection? So what we call as transactional practical life also must have a deep-rooted connection with the Paramarthika, which is the reality. See, previously, it used to be so funny. Previously, 7:45, no, 7:45. Indian time only 7:40. We never bothered. Clear? Now, people, if I have to call, people send messages, answering, talking, giving time for appointments, I have to specify 8 o'clock India time. Because I am saying 8 o'clock, I am saying 8 a.m. The other person in Seattle understands 8 a.m. What is 8 a.m. and what is 8 a.m. there? You have to specify. This kind of transactional things we understand for practical purposes, but it doesn't have an inherent reality. So you use this for transactional purposes, but you understand that it has no inherent real. Inherently, they are not real. If you understand it like this, what happens? Your practical applications will be smooth and effortless. You can switch over. Effortlessly, you can switch over. What will help us to switch over effortlessly like that? The right knowledge. What is the right knowledge? All experiences happen. The recognition of an experience happen only in relation to the opposite. To understand heat, you need the knowledge of cold. To understand poor, you need the knowledge of the rich. To understand the disease, you need the knowledge of health. Therefore, all understanding is invariably dependent on its opposite. So, all human intellect, all human understanding invariably happens only by connecting it to the opposite. That's why even in God, we call some as divine experience, non-divine experience. Even divine experience also, you can understand it only in relation to something as non-divine experience. What is non-divine experience? If you say Happy New Year in a disco, it is non-divine experience. If you say Happy New Year in Kapalishwar temple midnight, I don't know whether they are open or not. Yeah. If they open the temple at 12 o'clock midnight and then you go and say Happy New Year in the temple, it becomes divine. Huh? For transactional level, we understand the differences, but we don't give it an reality. It means all experiences happens in the medium of opposites, and reality is that which is beyond the opposites. Are you okay till now? If you want to get clarity, you can never get clarity by choosing between the opposites. You can always get clarity only by transcending the opposite. Are you able to follow again? You can never get clarity by choosing between the opposites. And the mind makes the mistake of choosing between the opposites. What is choosing between the opposites? Only health and no disease. Only profit and no loss. Only success, no failure. இப்படி ஆயினா இருந்தா என்ன ஆகும்? Only birth and no death. What will happen? You continue like this. You continue to choose one end of the opposite, and ignore the other, what will happen? Only birth and no death. Imagine only birth and no death. World will not be enough to hold everybody, isn't it? Therefore, inevitably, invariably, understanding in transactional level is the opposites, but the clarity of life you don't get by choosing between the opposites. The clarity of life you get by transcending the opposite. This is how the knowledge helps you in the transactional level, at the same time help you to transcend also. What does transactional level means? If I say we will talk at 11 o'clock, in the last 2 years, I have learned to say 11 o'clock India time. I have learned that. I have learned to say 11 o'clock India time. Why? Because I assume all along, Yajna invitation cards, if we print, global invitations card, if we print, it's a problem. Previously, when we print invitation card for the Yajna, it will go only to one state. So we will say 6:30 p.m. Now we have to say 6:30 p.m. IST, EST, I don't know, TST, I don't know what all T. I don't know how many T are there. In Hong Kong, what is it called? Some T, no? IST, EST. One country, 3 T, now what do we do again? Yeah. The same country has 2-3 T's. All this we accept it as a transactional level, and the reality is beyond the transactional level of living. The transactional level of living cannot influence the reality. The understanding of reality can make the transactional level better. You will follow? The understanding of reality can make your transactional life better. In that way, Ramatirtha says, it is the knowledge of Vedanta that makes life practical and simple, he says. Ramatirtha says, without the knowledge of Vedanta, life cannot be practical and life cannot be simple. The laws of life, LAWS, the principles of life. What is the principle of life? At the transactional level, you understand a few things exist. But on deeper contemplation, deeper understanding, you realize it is only for transactional level, isn't it? If the sunlight takes 8 minutes from the sun to reach the earth, when you should celebrate the new year? We all should celebrate 8 minutes backwards, huh? Because that is the time it started. No, from where did it start? Now we don't get into these kind of, we take certain things for granted as real for transactional purposes. Clarity is what is taken as real, permanent for transactional purposes is understood as not absolutely real. It's not absolutely real. In order to explain this, Vedanta uses this method. What is the method? They speak the language of contradiction. Upanishads directly speaks the language of contradiction and the student will not have a problem. When Krishna spoke the language of contradiction in Bhagavad Gita chapter 2, Arjuna said in chapter 3, Mati pesadi. Tadekam vada nischitya yena shreyo ham apnuyam. Tell that with clarity in clearly. Say clearly. Any clarity in the world is related to any clarity in the world that you get is always related to the specific time, place, situations. It is specific to that only. Once that changes, the fact also changes. That's where we are going to study that beautiful chapter, next chapter, Maya. We are going to study that. I think next is Maya, no?
Yes.
Maya then next. The illusory world, Maya. Beautiful chapter. Maya is just an explanation of facts. That's all. It's a simple fact. What is it? Whatever you call as fact is dependent on time, place, everything is dependent. So, as long as that remains static, this remains a fact. As long as that remains static, this can remain as a fact. If that is changing, then what will change? If that is changing, what is bound to change?
Conclusions.
The facts are also bound to change. The human intellect cannot comprehend it. It wants something. It wants something fixed. And the anchor point of Pushta, everything we can revolve around that, no? What is that point? Everybody is seeking that point. And Ramtirtha says, that point is you. Brahman is that point. Brahman is that point. If you can get one fixed point that is not dependent on the time, place, situation. If you can get one fixed point, world cannot give you that. In Vedanta, when we use the word world, it means universe, multiverse, all put together, we call it as the world. Can you get one fixed point? You cannot. Why? Because this is dependent on that, and that is dependent on something else, and that something else is dependent on something else. Go through this chain of dependent, and finally you come upon what all this is dependent upon? Adhishthanam, Brahman. Brahman is that Adhishthanam upon which all are dependent. How to explain this? The method they use is the language of opposites. And Kenopanishad is a masterpiece in all Upanishads are like that. Kenopanishad is the masterpiece. In section 2, Kenopanishad says, Aham manyesu vedeti, nona vedeti vedacha, onas tatveda, nona vedeti vedacha, yasyamatam tasya matam, matam tasya na vedasaha, avijñātam vijānatam, vijñātam abhijānatam. This is Kenopanishad mantra. The Westerners, when they read it first, they wrote it as, it is prattle, childhood prattle. Human being prattling in their early childhood. Or how can anybody, if you think you know it, if you say, I know it, you don't know it. If you say, I don't know it, you know it. Okay, correct. No solranga, okay, correct. Those who say, I know it, know it. Those who say, I don't know it, they also know it. By the sixth sentence, you don't feel like reading the Upanishad because you feel like saying, correct. What that fellow said is correct. It is prattle. Prattle, na? Prattle, what does it mean? Blabbering. No, blah, 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 something. Yeah, that's called blabbering. It doesn't make, blabbering means it doesn't have any meaningful continuity. That's why it's called blabbering. Blabbering means words will be used and that words will not have any continuity, so you can come to a conclusion. Words must have a continuity so that you can come to a Conclusion. And the continuity is grammar, noun, verb, preposition, adjective, and எல்லாமோ போட்டாங்க. Yeah, very confusing is that, isn't it? You put all that so that there is a words coined in the sequence will give you some understanding. Vedanta comes and breaks that. Vedanta comes and breaks that. Beyond the opposites. Therefore, he says the scripture uses the language of contradiction. Why the language of contradiction? What you want to communicate can never be communicated. Always remember this. What you want to communicate stays with you only. It can never be communicated. Or unless the other person also reached that height, that level. Till that time it remains with you. And how much ever the other person nods the head and say, I understand, you understand that the other person has not, to understand the other person has not understood it at all, isn't it? Simple example. The child says, I know my mother loves me very much. Or the child says, my mother doesn't love me at all. Mother will not give value for both. Correct? Mother will not give value for both. Why? Because if the child says, I love you also, the mother will laugh. If the child says, I hate you also, the mother will laugh. Why? Oh, how much I did to bring up my children. What all sacrifices I have made for them. And now they are turning back and saying, I don't love you. Will any mother cry? They will not cry. That mother will not cry. Why? Because she understands what? The love remains. The love remains what? Uncommunicated. Is there a word like that? Uncommunicated, incommunicated. It's not at all communicated. There is no way that it can be, or how much ever you communicate, the other person understands. The one who is communicating deep down will know what? It remains uncommunicated. Yeah. But your language, your word, language. There is no word like that. We will create a word. Who are they to create? We will create another. Yeah, somebody creates the word, we will also create another word. It remains uncommunicated. Why? Because anything deeper, the words fall flat. Anything deeper, the word falls flat. And if somebody can get carried away by the word, you understand that it's very shallow. It's very shallow to get carried away by the words. Why? Because, that's where by using certain words, the 10-year-old, 15-year-old can be easily cheated by a few words. Why? Because it's so shallow that they will fall for the words. At 50 and 60, any word you use will not. Correct, Srikanth? Any word use panal, it will not go in. Why? Because you have become that wise to understand what? Words and what is communicated through the words have no correlation. So subtler, that which you want to communicate, words cannot. Words is of no help. Words is of no help. Since all understanding can happen only through the medium of words, an extraordinary method the Shastras found out. What? Speak the language of contradiction. Using contradictory words, they try to explain. Using contradictory words. What is the contradictory words? Very far, very near. Closer than the closest, farther than the farthest. It is gross, it is subtle. Language of contradiction. And the language of contradiction is the Shastric style in the Vyavaharika worldly transaction. Don't try this. That's where you need clarity. Don't come and try the Shastric style in transactional style. In transactional style, will you pay tax or not? Yes or no? Ram Subramanian. Yes. Very clear. Non sonna? Correct. So, yeah. I also thought Nirmala Sitaraman will give another extension. I was waiting. And then Subramaniam, correct? She didn't give any, did she give any extension this time? No. No extension. Finished. So, at transactional level, it is very clear. What? You should not use the language of contradiction for transactional purposes. But to understand life and to improve the subtlety in life, deep inside you, you should have a different understanding. And you can effortlessly move between the two. This effortless moving between the two is what is called as the technique of life and living. This effortless moving from the real understanding you have, at the same time you can do a transactional life also. Are you able to understand the difference? If you can shift effortlessly between the two, you have learned the technique of life and living. And all great masters demonstrate that. Sri Krishna's life, he can effortlessly move. He never had any problem. You should give a commitment. Shankar, sir, something meaningful you taught. So that we need not give any commitment at all, no, in life anymore, because the answer is yes and no. Transactional level, there is a commitment, there is a honoring the commitment, and all that happens at the transactional level, and then you understand what? It doesn't have the status of reality. It is for transactional purposes, but you don't give it the status of reality. So everything in life has a transactional purposes, but reality is different. And what is real? And what is real? It is beyond the opposites. It affords a practical exercise to free oneself. That's what he said. I'm explaining how it is practical. The last three sentences of the paragraph says, it affords a practical exercise to free oneself, detach from one's involvement and attachment to the world at large, to negate the world. What is practical in this? You understand that it is opposite. Opposite means one is dependent on the other. It exists in that condition only at a particular time, place, situation. It cannot have an existence apart from the time, place, and situation. And world means time, place, situation. Fourth, you can add a person also if you want, you can add. Technically, it's called Desha, Kala, Nimitta. Patra means the person. You can add the person also if you want. Desha, Kala, Nimitta, Patra. Idallam put together in one word. It's called Dvandvas. This word Dvandvas can be elaborated in detail. That's what I did now. He didn't elaborate it. He just used the word Dvandvas, and Brahman is beyond the Dvandva. Now what we do, we take up the word Dvandva and we try to elaborate it. In elaboration, what do you understand? Dvandvas means opposites. Opposites means one is dependent on the one is dependent on the other for existence. If one is dependent on the other for existence, it appears to be real. No. It appears to be real as long as the condition remains static. And if the condition changes, the whole thing is changed. Yeah. In a matter of 6 hours, 9 o'clock, the car was floating. 3 o'clock in the morning, the road is clear. Oh my God, I tell you, that was a wonderful. Was anybody stuck in the traffic day before? Huh? Oh, correct. Then you all can understand the misery. We all can associate with, we all can understand the misery, isn't it? What a misery it was. You go now, a few hours later, I went on the same road. A few hours later, you go on the same road. It is so vastly different. You deal with it then, you deal with it now, accordingly. It means you deal with it then accordingly, you deal with it now accordingly, because you understand it's beyond, because your attention is beyond something. And what is that something your attention is? That Brahman, God, reality. Therefore, the language of contradiction is a practical tool. Language of contradiction is a practical tool to stretch the intellect. First, we should have an intellect and then stretch it. Yeah. Stretch the intellect presupposes that there is an intellect. So what do we do first? We will develop the intellect, and then we will try and first we will develop it, and then we will try and stretch it. What is it? How to communicate? How to communicate love? Millions and millions of poetry has come, millions and millions of movies has been made, and still it remains very elusive, isn't it? See, 2 + 2 = 4. Now, how many movies you can make? How many movies you can make? 1 movie you can make? 3 movies you can make? But then here, a very transactional thing called love itself is so elusive. If that itself is very elusive, as it gets deeper and deeper, it remains that much more elusive. And reality is beyond all this. The reality is beyond all this. For you to effortlessly move through the transactions, you should be anchored in the reality. If you are not anchored in the reality, by default, you will be anchoring in one opposite. If you are not anchored in the reality, where you will be anchored? You will not be hanging in the air. Where you will be anchored? You will be anchored in one end of the opposite. When you are anchored in one end of the opposite, the other end will haunt you. The other end will haunt you. The other end will torture you. The other end will stress you, suffocate you. Everything it will do. And then what do we do? Out of frustration, we will move to the, out of frustration, we will go to the other end of the opposite, hoping at least now everything will be all right. And then what do we understand? You go there, you realize what? Nothing has happened. Why? Because from one opposite, you have ended in the other. In order to effortlessly move between the opposites, you should be anchored in the real. Are you able to follow? And the reality is beyond the opposites. For in transactional life, what we call as practical life. Practical life is nothing but effortless, detached, moving between opposites. That's what is called practical life. What is practical life? You can effortlessly move between the opposites. That's called practical life. Correct? Success happens, you are not so carried away by it. Failure happens, you are not so depressed by it. When you are healthy, when you are healthy, you understand that. When you are sick, you understand that also. So you can effortlessly move into opposites only when you understand it rightly. It means what? To understand it rightly, you need an anchorage. And what is that anchorage? Reality, Brahman, world. World you have to operate, but where you should anchor? In Brahman. If you are not anchored in Brahman, by default, where you will be anchored? In the world. World means opposites. Of the two opposite means pair. Of the pair, you will be stuck in. Of the pair, you will be stuck in one. Just because you are stuck in one, world will not stay quiet. No, it will make you get exposed to the other. World, just because you are stuck in one, world is not going to, the world is not going to stay quiet. It will necessarily make you experience the other. And when you are experiencing the other, you get frustrated, you get depressed, you get agitated, you say life is not good, life is not fair, everything. Yeah, whatever. It's not fair. What is not fair? Opposite is the reality. How can it not be fair? For you to expect that you should not be an opposite is very unfair. The opposite is unfair. What is fair? It is an opposite, and you will experience both is being very fair. Yeah. That's how a Vedantin understands life and lives life effortlessly. This is the topic, beyond the opposites. With this, we conclude this lesson. Next week, we move on to chapter 7, the illusory world. Very important lesson. We'll read it in the next session. Chapter 6, we conclude for today. Okay. Yeah, good.